Why the are atheists so angry all the time? Sorry, that's not a great way to start a video, but our favourite long-haired, calm-talking religion bro is here to explain why atheists are angry at a god. And there's no point in stating the obvious right now, but I think I'll definitely say what you're thinking in this one. Hello, I'm the Skeptic, the British floating circle that watches people make extraordinary claims, and then I explain why I don't accept what they're saying. Atheists are angry because a long-haired dude says so. No, not Jesus. This guy, Brian. And he's not the Messiah, he's a very naughty boy. He found a video that shows an atheist being angry, and he has the answer as to why. Never mind just asking Brian. Although before we find out why we're angry atheists, if this isn't your first Skeptic video, hit the like, the subscribe and the bell, and hopefully we won't be angry at the algorithm. And a super thanks to those that hit super thanks in some recent videos. New Pitbull, Kevin, twice, Karen, New Pitbull again, Chris Shlomo, and Andreas. Lisa the Rainbow Giraffe bestows leaves upon you all. More hen. Come on, Brian, tell us why we're angry already. Oh, sorry, that was too much.
I recently saw a clip of an exchange between a street evangelist and a crowd of people that he was trying to evangelize. And at one point, an older man introduced his own contribution to the exchange by offering his own version of the problem of pain argument against the existence of God. And his remark was something like, how can God allow 6 million Jews to get murdered during the Holocaust? How can he sit by and do nothing when innocent children are abused in horrific ways or die of terrible diseases? And before the evangelist was able to respond, because this was supposed to be an interactive format.
The evangelist? Come on, Brian. You may have lived a sheltered life in your very brown library, but you should at least know that this guy is Cliff Connectley, star of such videos as Can Life Come from an Inanimate Object? Without God, What is Reality? What is Love? And Science versus Faith. Open up the internet sometimes. There's some hilariously silly things out there.
The man with the objection turned his back and walked away, refusing to listen to whatever answer might come. And it was clear that he was angry. He was gesturing aggressively, raising his voice, and in the end, he was too angry to wait for any kind of a response.
Well, it is frustrating to say something based in logic and reason, only for it to, most of the time, go in one ear and out the other. So, can you blame him?
And I don't think, and this is based on my own experience, which is quite extensive, that this kind of thing is exceptional.
You think your experience of atheists is extensive? We shall see very soon just how much you listen to atheists by how much you may misrepresent them. But I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt, for now.
That conversations about the existence of God can evoke this kind of emotional response, which is strange when you really think about it, right? Like, imagine if two pundits were debating who they thought should be, I don't know, like the Rookie of the Year in Major League Baseball.
Well, I have to commend you for this clip, Brian. He's here, he's there, he's every where. Roy Kent, sorry. Carry on.
And without really listening to the other person, one of them just spent most of his time and effort personally ridiculing and denouncing the other person, and then eventually just stormed away without listening to any kind of a response.
Because theists never do that, right? Not looking at you, Kenty and Matty.
If you were a witness to that kind of interaction, wouldn't you likely conclude that the enraged pundit was informed more by some personal resentment than reason and logic?
No, having been on the angry side, I know that frustration can do a lot to a person's well-being, and sometimes you just need to get something off your chest and not listen to a retort.
And what I find with a significant sample size of atheists, which I've been exposed to in this kind of work, is that they don't just disagree with certain doctrines of religion like Christianity. They hate it in an unambiguous way. The lack of ambiguity is demonstrated by the consistent habit of relying on condescension, ridicule, and what Chesterton called the sneer. They don't just disagree, they consider the thing to be contemptible.
Well, yeah, you're probably feeling extra attacked because you're in a massively Christian country where religious ideas are being pushed upon the general population by government, where there shouldn't even be religion. If I lived in a predominantly Muslim country and I hadn't been killed for being a non-believer, I'd be equally as vocal in my distaste for religion.
And that hatred can compel a person to refuse any possible evidence that might be presented to them, with more than a few leading atheists having admitted this kind of a prejudice.
How angry someone is doesn't change how unconvincing apparent evidence is.
Because what kind of a person trying to position themselves as rational would open a debate by admitting that they are unwilling to consider any possible evidence that could be presented for the existence of God?
I'll take things that didn't happen for 500, Alex. Try talking to an atheist, Brian. Who on earth says nothing you present will convince me? Please, present the evidence, and then I'll tell you if I'm convinced by it.
Because that would be an admission that this isn't about reason or evidence for them, but rather their own preferences and prejudices. But when pressed on this question, I've seen some leading atheists like Richard Dawkins and Peter Atkins come to mind, admit that there isn't any possible evidence that would persuade them. For example, if they were to witness like a miracle, some event that is impossible without supernatural intervention, which is the only kind of evidence that could exceed reasonable doubt, they would rather conclude that they were hallucinating or had gone insane than admit that something supernatural had actually occurred.
That is not the same. Explaining something with natural means is fine. If you can prove that there was a miracle and that it wasn't brain trickery, then great. I'm convinced that something happened, and I don't have a rational explanation for it for now. But if, in this hypothetical situation, something miraculous did happen, and the only explanation was supernatural, how would you know that it was your God that did it, and not Lisa the rainbow giraffe, leave be upon her?
And of course, this standard of skepticism, which I would claim is unreasonable, can be applied to anything. If I hate the idea that the earth is round and the possibility of it being round agitates me to the point of anger and contempt for those who disagree with me, then any evidence, even evidence that I experience firsthand in support of this claim, is something that I could just chalk up to the failures of my own faculties of perception. Like my eyes and my brain are simply deceiving me.
Again, speaking for folks without asking someone's position, going down the atheists are angry so they're irrational route is stupid.
And if I did that, wouldn't that be evidence of my own irrationality on this subject? Yes, it would.
Well, maybe we should test it out to see if you do, rather than just saying you will to try and prove a point.
Which is why atheists who demonstrate such animosity towards theism and who refuse to allow any evidence to be presented to them should be treated in the same way. These are not rational people offering reasonable degrees of skepticism. These are people motivated by emotions and personal animus, and to whatever degree that they invoke their rational faculties, it's at the service of their emotions and prejudices rather than the other way around.
Not at all. Present evidence. I love accepting things that are true, so give me some truth. Don't keep whinging that angry atheists won't listen to you.
What I think is going on with a lot of the people who rail against the existence of God and anyone who supports that claim is described by C.S. Lewis in his autobiography, recounting the inconsistency of mind and heart that he suffered with when he was an atheist. He says this: I was at this time living like so many atheists or anti-theists in a whirl of contradiction. I maintained that God did not exist. I was also very angry with God for not existing. I was equally angry with him for creating a world. And that's reminiscent for me of another quote by G.K. Chesterton when he said, the worst moment for an atheist is when he's really thankful and has no one to thank.
No way, man. The worst moment for me as an atheist is realising that I'm probably not going to see my loved ones again in some kind of afterlife governed by a floaty sky wizard. And when I feel thankful for something, I experience something joy-like that I can share with my friends and family who also may appreciate it. And I'm not angry at a God for not existing. You can't be angry at something that doesn't exist. That's just silly. But I am angry at the people that thought they should convince me that the thing I should believe in is real when they can't demonstrate it to be. But they still try and make you feel like you're the idiot for not accepting that a man in the sky made people and then made it possible for those people to do bad things, which the sky man could then punish them for. Yeah, that's just stupid.
And that's true enough, but the reverse, I think, is also true for a lot of atheists, in which they find themselves outraged about some perceived injustice in the world, but have no one to direct their complaint to.
Do you know any atheists, Brian? Because the injustices aren't what you focus on. You go for what can be done to help those affected. If there's an injustice, you, as a believer, just say, God works in mysterious ways, and you're done with it. That's pretty.
As a Christian, I believe that God cares about my prayers, and so there have been times when I've complained to him. I've raised my objection, and I also firmly believe that he honors those moments. He doesn't just rebuke me or smite me for it.
Whoa, there is a lot going on here. First of all, you pray for things even though clearly that God is supposed to have a plan, and you're then asking it to change it. Then you go against the God and think it made bad choices, so does that mean you think better than the God? And lastly, it doesn't smite you when you say it isn't doing a good job? Huh. I wonder why that is, Brian. For those of you that didn't get it, I'm suggesting it's because it's not real. You can't be smited by a non-existent being.
He receives those strained expressions, it interacts with them, and leads me towards some kind of understanding about it. But the atheist in the clip that I saw is distressed by historical events like the Holocaust and the seemingly arbitrary suffering of innocent people and children. Well and good, so am I. But my objections make sense in light of the fact that I believe in God who exists. If you don't believe there is anything more than matter and motion or the physical universe, on what grounds do you have to say that the world and the events captured in time should have been another way?
Are you talking natural disasters or man-made crappiness? Because one, you just go, oh, I hope folks are okay. And the other, you go, oh, I hope the person that started it is okay.
Which is what we're doing when we make moral objections. To say that things should be other than they are is to accuse the physical universe of being other than what it should be. How can you say that if the physical universe is all that there is?
You're suggesting that is what I say. I could just go, wow, that's can we do anything?
Like if I were playing a video game and it had fixed rules and code governing those rules, and something happens that I don't really like in the game, I might object and say that, yeah, it shouldn't have been configured that way, should have been a different way. But when I do that, I'm appealing, perhaps in a futile way, to the game developers. I'm saying they should have done this differently, but if there was no game developer, if the game was all that there was, on what grounds would I have to say it should have been made differently?
Dumb analogy. You know and can demonstrate that games are made. You cannot, with the world, prove the world developer and the rules it apparently set forth. And if you're really that annoyed by how a game works, make your own game, the way you want it to be played.
That would be an entirely irrational sentiment. And atheists who express outrage about their moral misgivings are basically doing this. To rephrase Chesterton's remark, the worst moment for an atheist is when he is really angry about some injustice and has no one to direct his complaint.
But that's incorrect. If the injustice is human, I can direct it at a certain Russian leader that's being a jackass about things, or a giant orange idiot that tries to bribe adult film performers into silence. I mean, if I was complaining about those things specifically.
All he can do is just shake his fist at the sky and never get any satisfaction for it, because according to his own beliefs, the sky will neither listen nor care.
I'd rather do that than say something to a person I believed was in the sky and they did zero about it, almost like they're not listening, or don't care, or don't exist.
Making it an irrational thing to do. But if you feel this relentless impulse to judge the events that occur within space and time and say they should have been otherwise, which I would argue that every single human being has done, isn't that evidence that there is something more than space and time?
No. It's just proof that it happens.
Isn't that evidence of a moral law that indicates that somehow the material world we live in is not realizing its fullest potential? And if so, well then what is that potential if not something that exists outside of space and time?
Why do you keep saying space and time? Just say something that exists, because something that is outside of existence is what now, Bri? That's right, non-existent.
It makes way more sense to believe in the supernatural, which is that which transcends and exceeds the natural or the physical universe.
How the bloody hell do you know something transcends the physical? If it's transcending it, you can't ever know about it. So you're making stuff up then, right? You have to be at this point.
When we are held captive by these kinds of sentiments, on a daily basis, we can't avoid doing that. If you think the problem of pain is unresolvable, that doesn't mean that the supernatural or that God doesn't exist, just that you aren't morally aligned with it or with him.
Why would anyone want to be morally aligned with, if it existed, a being that thinks it's okay to kill, to own people as property, and to treat women as lesser than men? No thanks.
But you can at least then level your complaint in a rational way rather than just denouncing the universe of which you are a mere contingent part, and of which doesn't care about your complaint.
Having something to complain to in a situation rather than finding a way to better the situation is pretty crappy of you, Brian. It's also a little bit like praying. Completely and utterly useless. And that was pretty short. And so I want to quickly see why Brian says a God doesn't make it obvious it exists, since he knows how to communicate outside of time and space, apparently.
A super common refrain you'll hear from people against belief in the existence of God, especially according to the Christian conception of God, goes something like this. If my salvation, my eternal life, depends on belief or faith in God, and is therefore, you would assume, extremely important to him, he would obviously want me to believe in him. And the thing is, he could easily make himself known to me. He could simply appear to me, he could speak to me, he could perform some sort of sign or wonder that would convince me in a definitive way to let me know that he at least exists. And if he's all powerful, that wouldn't be very hard for him to do. But he doesn't do that. So he either can't, he's indifferent towards whether or not I believe in him, or he's simply not there, none of which is compatible with the Christian notion of God. Now, this is a pretty common atheistic argument, although I have heard some atheistic standard bearers like Richard Dawkins and Peter Boghossian and Peter Atkins admit that there's pretty much no evidence that they could possibly convince them that God actually does exist.
Or maybe it's that nothing so far has been compelling, and so, given the amount of time they've been doing this, as it stands, nothing could convince them. But I'm not speaking for them. I speak for me, and I don't know what it would take to convince me.
Even if God wrote a message to them in the stars in the heavens, they would have to conclude that they had simply gone insane.
Or that there might be another explanation. Why on earth would a god write a message in the stars and not just appear saying, "Here I am, it's me"?
In other words, their problem isn't that there is a lack of evidence, or as we often hear, that there's actually no evidence whatsoever. Their problem is that they won't admit any kind of possible evidence for the existence of God. For them, this is about a devotion and a commitment to a system of belief in certain Enlightenment era presuppositions, not evidence.
Shut up, Brian, you handsome idiot. What gives you the right to say you know what someone who is an atheist thinks? Are you just mad because your evidence isn't convincing and that's all you have?
But for everyone else, for people who would be satisfied with some sort of evidence or some sort of encounter with God, I'd argue that there's another possible explanation for why God wouldn't reveal himself in such an explicit way. And since I would promote the Christian conception of God, it's important for us to understand what Christianity says about the larger context in here. Because if knowledge about God is an exchange between God presenting himself to us, if we're part of that equation, then we need to know something about ourselves. And Christianity starts by telling us something about ourselves. It says that by our rebellion against God, we have adopted a condition that it sort of compromises our moral ability and our ability to know and understand what is good and true.
Couldn't the God just appear and clear up any confusion there too? Oh, but it wants you to make your own choices despite it actually knowing what's going to happen anyway. That's right. Yeah, sounds pretty stupid.
And evidence of this compromised nature is everywhere. Just think about ignorance in general. Because remember, there are plenty of facts and truths that are hidden from mine and your perception. You have to train your mind through education and study and the rehearsal of those things to begin to appreciate such truths and such facts.
I wonder what you'd be saying about the Christian gods if you did all that whilst growing up and living in India with Hindu parents, Brian. Somehow, I doubt you'd be saying anything about the Christian God. Really?
But just because they're hidden from your mind doesn't mean that they aren't there or that they don't exist or that they're inevitably completely inaccessible to you. It just means that something is preventing you from understanding until that something is remedied through knowledge or virtue or training.
Or being told by the dominant religion in your area that their God is the right one. Yeah, this is pretty ridiculous, but worth a shot at least. So Brian pretends he knows what atheists think and that his God is the right one. I'm not even remotely surprised, but it does make me pretty Nope, No, it doesn't. I think Brian would actually benefit from having some real conversations with atheists from time to time instead of just guessing what they're thinking. Good going, Brian. I'm not convinced you understand where atheist frustration actually does come from, and that's okay. But perhaps you do think that atheists are unjustly angry. Let me know in the section below. I'm going to skeptic this as one of the calmest atheist interactions ever. A big thank you to this month's top-level ticks on Patreon. Dark Ether Piao, Tamo, The Barely Bearable Atheist, George, Godless Granny, Addy Rockart, The Enixes, Jakari, Elizabeth, Whiskey Tech Fred, and Rick, as well as all the $3 base ticks. You can become a supporter on Patreon too at patreon.com/theskeptic. The link is in the description, along with links to all my other socials. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. From me, the Skeptic, stay safe, keep thinking logically, and ask questions. Skepticism is the first step towards truth. See you next Saturday.